Shalom, shalom. We're sitting here with a prominent leader in our Israelite community, a man who has traveled the world many times, a Hebrew teacher, Torah teacher, author, teacher of many. It is with pleasure that I bring to you all Cohen Ben Levi. How are you, Cohen?
Doing wonderful. Torah Rabbi for this opportunity. Pleasure sitting with you as well.
Okay, Cohen, because I've been waiting for this opportunity for such a long time. I just wanted to ask you, you know, certain things. I've been doing this interview series with the elders in our community, and I just wanted to ask you some questions, some certain things that you've been through. But first, what I like starting out with is asking everyone about their origins, because I think that that's important to know where everyone came from, who are your parents, where were you born. If you don't mind, will you please?
Oh, it's a divine pleasure. First of all, I would say, Sifatai Tiftak Ufiyagi Tahila Teka. I want to not only take the opportunity to answer your questions, but to thank the Holy One of Israel, the power of our ancient forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael, for all the great souls that I've read about, going back to the ancient days, even into modern times, and to give thanks to Yah for the noble cause, this our cause, which now I am one of those persons who's carrying it on. So I want to thank Yah for them, and thank Yah for this opportunity to extend this truth to our people. I was born in Harlem in 1948. I migrated a few years after that to Brooklyn, New York. Grew up in Brownsville area, and again went to school in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Later went to University Morgan State College in Baltimore. Came back and got my first degree, Bachelor of Arts, in City College up on Convent Avenue. And then I did in the graduate school, got a Master's of Science and Education at City College School of Graduate School of City College.
Wow, that's an extensive, I didn't even know all that about you. That's an extensive record and collegiate record, especially for our youth today. It's good for them to know that a lot of what you got was through hard work and putting in the time. So in terms of this way of life and the Israelite community, how did you come to knowledge of yourself?
I want to first of all add something to that. I would be remiss, Chief, if I did not acknowledge my father, whose name was Shamaria Ben Levi, and my mother was Miriam Bat Levi.
Okay.
They're the parents that brought me into this world, gave me the values that I have growing up in Brownsville, the values of being a person of character, of manners, of those things that allow you to achieve in life, right. Knowing how to get along with other people and all types of people. Right. Making the right decisions and choices in these mean streets of New York. Right. I would not have made it if I didn't have that parent in that home. Many of my friends didn't have a father and mother in the home, so that was a great blessing to have both parents and have the guidance that they gave me to navigate through the streets of Brooklyn. And of course, all of Brooklyn was where I was at. Right. Even though I might have been born in Brownsville, being a sports person, I traveled and just had so many contacts with all the projects and everything. Right. And the gangs of that time were Roman lords and Frenchmen and jolly midgets and you name it. I had to know how to navigate through that. Right. And without the Holy One of Israel being with me, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. Okay. When I came into this way of life, it started with really the 60s. In the 60s, I would consider it a Renaissance period. There's a knowledge known as the Harlem Renaissance, and it was sort of like a rebirth of black people and knowledge that was coming to our people through some of those great people like, again, you can go back and look at Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Drew Ali and Rabbi Washington, I would say Rabbi Matthews in the Hebrew community, right, and so many of those. But they were all part of what was the Marcus Garvey movement, the UNIA. Right. And so just that continued spread of enlightenment coming from entertainers, the last poets, and as a teenager, probably at around 17 or 18, I began to listen to that. Prior to that, life was enjoying myself in sports, basketball, and just having fun. Right. But it got very serious when I began to hear those types of messages. And I remember hearing from Malcolm X how Islam was a religion for black people. He was denouncing Christianity in a very strong manner. And so with that, I began to start thinking very seriously about whether this religion was the right one, seeing a European figure that stood before me. My mother had a picture of him in the house, and it just started to question in my mind very silently within myself. I remember one Sunday being in church. It was Father's Day, and I was in Mount Olive Baptist Church up on Eastern Parkway, right, and St. Mark's, right, and Reverend Brown was speaking about the fact that it was Father's Day. An offering plate went around, right, and he was very angry over the amount of money that was in the plate. I was sitting in the balcony, and I recall seeing his anger, and he said to the church, he said, "I want the plate to go around once again." And he said, "This time I want to make sure that I'm satisfied with the amount of money that you're going to give me." Wow. And he said, "Today is my day. Forget about God. It's my day." And I got up and walked out of the church. Words. My mother was sitting in the balcony. She was in the choir. I was the only person that walked out. And again, I went home, and my siblings were in the house, and they saw that something was very disturbing in terms of my spirit. And I told them I'm never going back to that church again. And they said, "Are you going to tell Mama that when she come in?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to let her know I'm never going back there again." And so they waited. Everyone was sitting down. You know how that goes. You better. That was a real show. And she walked in, and she said to me, "Reverend Brown was wrong. He should have never said that." Right. And I said, "Imam, I'm not going back to that church again." She said, "You got to find God." And I said, "I'll find him. And you're right, I'm going to look for him, but I know he's not in that church. So ain't no sense me going back there." And that started my journey. I then went following a number of people asking me to join the Nation of Islam. In the 60s, 64, right on up to the early 70s, the Nation of Islam was very strong and prominent throughout the cities. I mean, they had the bean pies, they had Shabbat's barbershops, right, they had, again, the newspaper, Muhammad Speaks and all of that. And so, again, they were asking me, "You'd be a great person. You need to join the Nation of Islam." And I would ask them simple questions. What's that language that you all speak? And they would say Arabic. And I would say, "Well, do you speak it?" And they would say, "No, you come to the mosque, they'll teach you, they'll tell you." Some of them didn't even know it was Arabic. They just knew that they said Assalamu alaikum and so on and so forth. I would ask them various questions, but they just weren't giving me the answers. So what is Islam? Right. And, they just didn't give me thorough answers. So I went to 116th Street and Lenox Avenue. That was Temple number 7 or Mosque number 7. Right. And I bought the book called The Teachings of Islam. At that time, I was working for Model Cities Housing, because a lot of the homes in Brownsville were, again, in very bad shape. Right. And we did the type of rehabilitation to the buildings and heat and hot water and trying to stop the rats and all of those things. And there was a brother on the job, his name was Nasi Tavel. And he saw me reading the book, and he asked me what I was looking for. And I recall I told him I was little sort of ashamed or shy or naive or even not anxious to say that I was looking for God, but that's really what I was looking for. And he started asking me questions. He said, I'm looking for the truth. And he asked me, said, which one? And that seemed to be a question that was even more difficult than the first one I had. I mean, I was already confused, and now his questioning just brought another level of, confusion in terms of not knowing the answers. And he asked me, he said, are you looking for God? I said, yes, I'm looking for God. He said, which one? Again, I never thought about being a whole lot of different gods, and he made it clear to me by asking this question. He said to me, if you tell me your nationality, I tell you your culture, your God, because through nationality you get everything. He said, what is your nationality? I was a senior in college at the time, and to not know my nationality, about to graduate with a degree for City College in history, I was ashamed. And I mean, it was not so much thinking of the shame, but the fact that I couldn't answer this simple question of who I am. Right. What was my nationality? So he started saying, are you French? I said, no, I know I'm not French. Well, are you German? I know I'm not German. I'm not a European. And then he asked me, said, well, do you think you came from Africa? Absolutely. Came from Africa. Where at? Again, now there I'm again on stupid once again. Had no idea of where in Africa I came from, but my mind was again opening up because I realized this was a line of questioning that made sense for the first time. His questions just began to open me up, and finally we began to talk about the fact that I was a Hebrew, and he invited me to come and study at a Shabbat Yisrael. Maybe 3 months just on the job, we were talking, and I was wondering when he was going to ask me. In fact, I thought he was the teacher, and he finally told me, said, no, I'm going to take you to a man that's the teacher. And he said, in fact, you're going to be my teacher. Now, that really threw me off. How am I going to become his teacher? And so, again, I got there. He introduced me to Cohane Levi. Before even the first Shabbat, I never came to a Shabbat on a Shabbat initially. I came to the Hebrew class because I was going to the East on Claver Place to study Swahili. Okay. And my brother and I, Segun, we were driving. I said, stop by this place on 539 Belmont for a moment, and I'm just going to walk in there, pay my respects to the brother who invited me, and we'll just continue on, and I'll go to the class next week. Well, the class was in progress. They were doing the Aleph Beit, and they were going through the letters, Aleph Beit. They said, have a seat. And just naturally came to me. I just knew Aleph Beit, Veit, Gamel, Dalet, Hey, Wow, and they were going over drilling it. Who's the teacher? The teacher at that time was Gavret Batsheva. Okay. Aishan and Gavret Bessemer, and Cohen was doing an advanced class, and Adon Bapakwa was doing another class, and Nasi Barak was doing the highest and most advanced class. So I got in this class. I think I might have been in there 15 minutes. All of those who were there before me, I grasped that alphabet, and she sent me to the next class. Cohane Levi was a little disturbed, saying, why are you moving the brother so quick? He said he knows it. I've drilled him all up and down, tau, point to any letter, he knows it. I went to the door and told my brother, I said, look, I'll make that Swahili class next week. It's now 2017. I never made that Swahili class. So again, that's how much it just seems so natural. These sounds, I mean, just Aleph Beit, it just was so natural, the sounds, and just made so much sense. And the way they explained it, that the first letter Aleph came from the word alphabet, and that's where they got the word alphabet from, the first two letters. It just resonated like common sense to me. And I went on to Bapakwa's class. I was in that class a few weeks, and before I knew it, maybe a month or so, I was in Nasi Barak's class, and he was traveling. And then Moreh Mishael was the person who Cohen selected to take over Nasi Barak's class, and I was in that class, and we bonded, and that was how it started with the Hebrew.
Right.
With Cohen Levy, I'll never forget, I was there probably 3 months. And as I looked around and saw the different brothers and services that they had, I wanted to probably be someone like Nasi Barak or Nasi Tavel, to go around and teach and speak to people, bring them in. We had a term called a fisher and a hunter.
Right.
That's really what I wanted to do.
Right.
I dreaded Cohen Levy's job. I never told anyone. But the last job that I wanted in there, in my mind, was his job,
right.
Standing in front of the people and speaking, because I know our people's spirits from the streets. Right. You know how hard we can be,
right.
with hearing truth or hearing anything, right. You know, just dealing with it with our attitudes.
Right.
And so one day, maybe 3 months, Cohen walked over to me and he said, I want to speak to you. He said that, I don't know you, brother. He said, you just got here. But he said, Yehovah told me to make you a priest. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. But I also knew that it was the thing that I had to do. It was never a question, even from the first telling me that. I had no idea, no thought about it, because my mother had raised me on an understanding of putting God first.
Right.
And that was how I navigated. I was always very prayerful, trying to get through these mean streets of Brooklyn. And so I could not turn him down, especially when he said, God, Yehovah, said to make you a priest. I don't know you. So to this day, I consider 48 years later that it was not Cohen, but he told me that Yehovah himself said to do it.
Right.
So that's how I started. I went immediately into the priesthood, to his home in Astoria, Queens. Right. And we had one-on-one classes. I became his chauffeur. So we talked 24/7 every time I was with him, and it seems like I was with him 24/7. And this is how I got all of my teachings. He said that I had a photostatic memory, because I listened to him in the service, and whatever I heard, I can go and tell people almost immediately. So I began to bring people from the university, from job where I was working, into the temple. And again, I remember him telling me, when I told him I wanted to be a fisher and a hunter, he said, Yehovah don't want you going out fishing anymore. He said, he's going to bring the fish to you. He said, and that's what made me really comfortable with doing it, because he said, you're going to fish them out their seats. And then I said, wonderful, let's go. In my mind, I didn't tell him that, but I knew and understood that I was going to be able to do exactly what I wanted to do, because I wanted to tell the whole world this truth.
Right. Wow, that's great. That's a great history in itself, and knowing how you develop and how everything came to you, because you know a lot of people they don't get it. You know, you see people come and go, but they don't get it like that. And then just on a hunch, hey, let's stop there, and then you just fell right in line. That's wonderful. Now you spoke about the 60s and Malcolm X, and sometimes I like to ask questions about events that happen within the black community that affects us all as a whole, not just us as a segment of the black community, but the community as a whole. How did Malcolm X's death affect you as a youth?
One, I would say that
how did you feel?
It was extreme sadness, of course, but his life was more important to me than his death. Okay. I focused on his message, his words. He was, for me, the most profound speaker, and he brought clarity to issues that no other person did during my lifetime. And I used to do Malcolm X speeches, The Ballad or the Bullet. Right. He had a book called, again, Grassroots. and I did those speeches in college, you know. So his words and his message, when I heard him do interviews, how sharp he was what impressed me so much, that he could be interviewed by anyone, and he just had a gift of gab,
right,
where he can answer questions so intelligently and so clearly. And that's what I to this day remember about Malcolm.
Okay.
And so again, it was a great loss. I knew that. Again, I knew later Betty Shabazz. So again, all of those things that happened within his family and how she was passed was of deep pain and sadness.
Right.
And also, when you look at the Nation of Islam and understand, if you look at Spike Lee's movie on it and some of the things where you don't know all the facts, but sifting through what had happened and the manner in which, you know, his death occurred, it was an eye-opener also in terms of knowing how our people are in terms of great organizations. I remember one of the profound things that Malcolm said, that he had built one of the greatest organizations in the world, and that the Nation of Islam had done so under the Elijah Muhammad, but was those jealousies and envy and things that destroyed all of that. So again, I just always kept that in mind and still see it to this day.
Right. Moving right along, what about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, when I remember both of them, they were like two extremes of an idea. So I recall Malcolm on one hand being the person that was, again, anti-America, a revolutionary in another sense. Malcolm, as opposed to Martin Luther King, who had a movement of peace, just like the late the man of India, Gandhi, and he got all of his ideas from him, and he was trying to make change through peace.
Right.
So it was, for me, trying to figure out which of those areas were best for our people. And of course I got the answers, and knowing that, you know, Malcolm himself came around after the break with the Nation of Islam. He proclaimed that he was a black nationalist. And from Cohen Levy, he shared with me that he was supposed to meet with Malcolm, him and the late brother Noam Yosef Ben Ephraim,
okay,
that it was set up through Malcolm's captain for him to meet Cohen. He was assassinated like a week or two later.
Oh, wow.
And so I always knew that if they two had ever met, what it would have been, because the captain of Malcolm told Cohen that this is exactly what Malcolm was looking for, the identity. He knew it was no longer about religion,
right,
that the answer was really in nationality. He just didn't know which nationality it was.
right,
And Cohen had the answer, that we were the Hebrew Israelites, the people of the Bible. And of course, as you know, the Nation of Islam, from the late Honorable Elijah Muhammad himself, again, Dr. Khalid Muhammad, even Minister Farrakhan declares today the reference to the children of Israel, and that he knows that. And so I even met Farrakhan in Chicago at the University of Illinois.
How was that meeting?
I stopped the whole show. I'll never forget it. I was visiting and training priests in Chicago, Kohen Abdi, Kohen Amatzi, and so they told me that Farrakhan would be speaking at the University of Illinois. We all arrived there in turbans, and they asked me to go up and ask him a question. And I remember asking him this question. I said to him, Minister, I'd like to ask you a question, not about religion, but a question about nationality, about ethnicity. I understand that the Nation of Islam has declared that the religion of Islam, that even the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had tailored, was for the black man in America, called the black Muslims.
Right.
And so it was not the Arabian type of Islam. It was one tailored for our people here, and to bring them in particular out of Christianity. And so again, I told him that I did not have a religious question. I was clear on that issue, but I wanted to know, did they know the identity of our people and that they were not declaring it at this time? Or did you know or not know that we were the children of Israel? And it was the longest pause that I've ever had anyone take in asking him a question. Right. And finally he looked at me and he said, "Brother, we are brothers. I want you to hear me. We are brothers." And he walked off the stage. He didn't take another question. He embraced me, and the Fruit of Islam walked him to the elevator, and the brothers in Chicago with turbans followed me. And he asked me would I meet with him tomorrow and break bread. And I'll never forget that term that he used. And I told him that I would have loved to do so, but I was headed back to New York, and I had a flight the next day going to Guyana, South America. Right. We met 20 years later in Guyana. Oh, wow. When he came to Guyana, and we continued that conversation. I was given the task of setting up his security while he was in Guyana. Right.
Okay, that's great. I didn't even know you met the minister.
Absolutely.
You know, that's a great thing. So, you know, in terms of all of that, you know, going forward, as far as you were speaking about your we got to the point to where Cohane Levi told you that he wants you to be a Cohane. He's training you to be a Cohane, and this is your job, and this is what he wants you to do. At what point did you begin to like mentally say, because it's not, being in that position is not something really that you look for, but sometimes it finds you. You know, like it did with you. At what point did it click in your mind, like, hey, I know how to speak to people. You know, I know how to bring them in. I know how to use words in order to because sometimes it's that fine line. Like, you're still new in this, you're still learning, but where is the line where, I'm trying to put this question in the right way. That line to where, you know, this is, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And, you know, I'm bringing people in, but this is what I really want to do. Like, was there a moment where you said, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Because you were still young at that point. You know?
I was 20 years of age.
Yeah, you were still young. Yes, at that point, you know, people, they don't really, no, there's a study that said that the brain is not fully developed till you're 25 years old. So at what point did you say, this is my stamp of approval? Was it immediately, or was it some time when an event happened that told you, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
Before you said immediately, that was my answer. I knew immediately that was my calling. Right. I also was told by Cohane this statement. He says, "You're the oldest young man I've ever known."
Wow.
Today I want to be known as the youngest old man.
In reverse.
So that's how I look at it now, right. Being a young older man.
Right.
But again, I never forget those statements because I came in very mature. Okay. I was probably closer to elders as a teenager than I was to my own peers. Right. I had a friend, he's made transition, he died many years ago. His name was Lennox Cole, and his father and I were closer than me and his son was. So when I would go up to his house, I would be sitting with his father and all of his father's friends, and that's where I would be listening and asking questions. That's where my further enlightenment took place, because these were men that had beards, and they weren't just the clean-shaven guys, and they just had a different type of aura and consciousness. Right. And I remember one of the guys in particular, he was named Donald. No one even knew any other name by him. He was wanted by everybody. And, you know, one of those figures that was underground. and it's just very intriguing. But he had profound knowledge, but he wasn't any part of streamlined society. My parents raised me to walk the narrow and straight path of the society, right. But those persons were the persons that brought enlightenment and answers, gave me understanding of questions that right. I could not get in from my parents. My parents were from the South, from Georgia. My father had 2nd grade education. My mother had 7th grade education, so that they really didn't understand what black people were really going through. They were just trying to teach us to do the right thing, go to college, you know, be polite to everyone, which I still to this day have those values. Right. But it was people who knew the deeper struggle and the real prejudices and the discrimination and the racism that was going on and still exists to this day. Right. That opened up my mind, because no matter who you are as a black youth, you experience, you're stopped on the street, you understand, in a way that other people are not. You see the drive-by shootings of our own people, but you also know that the police were involved with drugs, and they were the ones who brought these things into the neighborhoods, and they were as much a part of the destruction of our people as we were and still are to this day of ourselves. So I got deep understanding of that at a very young age, and I wanted to help. I knew that money was not what we needed. When I was introduced to the laws of the Creator and the values and the principles of Almighty God, Yehovah, the maker of heaven and earth, and saw those wonderful precepts that were in all of the books, the prophets, it just, everything became clear. All of the questions that I had as a child were answered when I met Cohane Levy. And so, no, I was enthusiastic, waiting to go out and tell everyone. I recall being in 539 Belmont Avenue, and it was very painful to see people who had received this knowledge. They were beautiful people, people of the streets, but they were in such a bad shape of what society had done to them, that to learn this and apply it, many of them had come from broken homes. They too had come out of the gangs of the streets, like just like Muslims had gone into jail and turned people into beautiful, decent citizens. Cohane Levy was doing that at 539 Belmont. So when I came in, my desire was to help our people and share these values and this truth, knowledge of self. As we know in Hosea, it says we are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. So I knew that I had already been in university. I knew how to research, and so I had the skills that I'd already acquired and knew why I had those skills. Everything came full circle for me. So I knew that this was my calling. And once I recall, after being very hurt about how Israelites were living in the communities, how we were still divided even with this truth in what were called the camps at that time, and just said to Yehovah, I remember a portion is in Isaiah 6, where the posts and the pillars were shaking. Right. And Isaiah was sitting there thinking that he would die at that point. And the angels, the seraphim, went and took the coals off of the altar and touched Isaiah's lips and said with those tongues, thy sins have been expiated. Mm-hmm. And then a voice came to Isaiah, said, whom shall we send? And he said, send me. Based on that portion that Cohane Levy taught so eloquently, my pain one Shabbat, I recall in prayer saying to Yah, send me. If you're going to send a servant anywhere in the world, I will go. Send me, I'll do it right and I'll do it correctly. And I was very, very disturbed in terms of what I saw. And that was a spiritual calling. I tell people, never ask Yah for anything unless you really want it. Because I've been now, once I recall being on 5 continents in 1 month.
Wow.
So, you know, I've been traveling all over this planet, and I want to do it. I love doing it because I've been able to teach our people in all types of countries and cultures. It's just what I love doing.
Right.
Enlightening and seeing that look on people's faces when they become conscious,
right.
aware of who they are and what their purpose is on this earth. And again, immediately I knew.
Right.
And to this day, 48 years later, I was 20, probably around that when I came in. 7 years later, people don't realize I was only with Cohane for 7 years. At 27, I was leading almost 100 people out of this country to Guyana, South America, where I've been over like 42 years now. So again,
here a short period of time.
I've lived outside of America more than I have lived here. My family, I thank Yah for my family, the children, the Isha and the Nashim that held up, because Guyana had a very poor economy.
Right.
I had to come back and forth and teach in the public education system to keep my family there. And sometimes I would spend years, but other times I only saw my family Christmas time for 10 days, Easter time for 10 days, and then 2 months during the summer. There was a lot of pain, and you know, when you're doing something like that, and many leaders, they sacrifice their family for their nation and their people. So I know, again, that's my calling. But one of that other part of that prayer was that Yah would, if I go and in my mind at that time save the world, then please save my family. So he brought my mother and father, sisters and brothers. I have aunts. I have hundreds of relatives that have know this and lived this to this day. So it was a great swap. You understand?
On your family.
Just every day, their knowledge, and they're strong. And so again, I continue to do my part, and he continues to bring my family. And even when I say family, I mean extended family. All of those brothers and sisters that are a part of a family. That's what Israel is and should be understood, that we are one family, and this is a family reunion, whether it's Ghana, South Africa, Uganda, Jamaica, Trinidad. We all are part of that triangular slave trade that started from Africa, went to the Caribbean, and then came up to North America. My route is from North America back to the Caribbean, and now I'm back to Israel. As you know, I've just been in Israel just a few days ago, in fact, just yesterday. So again, the work goes on, and it's a lifetime work of continuing to point our people home and to make them aware of who we are and who our Creator is, and that we go back and obey His laws and be a righteous and a holy people again.
Hallelujah.
A wonderful question, Toda, for asking.
Do you recall how many countries you've been into? Like, do you keep account? Like, all right, I've been to this one, I've been to that.
No, I do not. In fact, I don't even keep account of speeches or interviews. I just go on to the next one.
How many continents?
Continents, I've been on every one except Antarctica.
Wow. You've been on every continent?
Except Antarctica.
That's great. Wow.
I don't want to go there. It's too cold.
That's great. That's good for our children to know.
Yes.
That, you know, they said that a traveling man is full of knowledge, and I know you've seen, like me, just going back to where I was born, Panama, gave me a different perspective, because the Panama that I left when I was a child, it's way totally different than the Panama that you see now. You know, so going back, I'll also say I have, you know, something came home with me and told me, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted also to communicate with you and say I have to do something here, because our people are waiting for this knowledge, but things are so, they look like it's so much despair, especially for our people.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, how do you start? How do you get it going? How do you, you know, so how do you go about doing something like that? And in a situation that seems like there's so much despair, and there's so much let's say, because we have so many brothers and sisters that come from the Caribbean islands, from Haiti, from all these places, Jamaica, like you mentioned, Trinidad, and all these places. How can a person today just get up like how you did? Not, I know during that time it was different circumstances. Guys had a fund going on, and you were sent down there. How do you go about? Just how do you start to do something like that? Can you give someone like a blueprint? How do you start to do that?
Yeah, excellent question. I love the question, especially for our youth. Right. As you pointed out, I want them to know it's doable. You start with being an example of what you were taught. When you go to a place and you say you're a Hebrew and you keep the Shabbat, people look at you not by what you say, but by what you do. So that you have to be about and stay aligned with your purpose. So that's the first thing. The next thing you have to do is that you have to realize that you're not just there to teach, you're there to learn as well, because you're experiencing something that you do not know, and that's another society. So it takes a humility that you have to have anywhere you go. As your honor increases, so should your humility. That's Proverbs, and those are the principles that we have to apply. Again, when I get the opportunity, you have to have the courage to share the information. So I couldn't wait to get on television or radio, to be interviewed, to be able to speak about what we represent, and giving that hope and that understanding to people who need knowledge, because that's really wherever we go, we are destroyed for the lack of the right knowledge. Right. Not just knowledge, but the correct and the right knowledge, which is knowledge of self. And religion, Christianity in particular, has been devastating to our people across the planet, and all of the colonial situations, whether it's under the Spanish and the Catholic Church, the Anglican and the British Church, the Dutch or the French or what have you, you have to be able to penetrate their minds and let them see what this history has been and what it has done. So again, you have to form relationships. And I remember just being in school and being taught this by my parents, that you have to learn how to get along with people. They have that on the report card, get along well with others. So if you don't score good in that area, even as a child, you're not going to develop it. So development starts from the very time you come into earth, and it starts in the home. So you have to continually be aware of your own development. I'm still developing. Cohen Levy told me that traveling broadens you. So I'd like the youth to know that's how you get broadened. That's how you learn and you grow, by traveling. So also, he said that knowing Yehovah, he said that you will begin to have the adventure of your life. That was an understatement, because it's an adventure to go, and what you see and what you behold. I can't, with words, tell anyone what my eyes have seen and what my ears. I just like to take you on that journey, to experience what I've experienced. It's just unbelievable. Right. And it's wonderful, so you just want more of it and to share it, because when you've read the Tanakh, and you've been at the Salt Sea or the Live Sea, when you've read about Jerusalem and then walk all through Jerusalem day and night, when you've been, in the hills where David ran from Saul in Gedi, it takes on a whole nother perspective of everything. When you've landed in Turkey and been at the Mediterranean Sea, so again, when you've gone to Ghana and been in the homes of kings of the Ashantis, when you've been down and landed in Durban, South Africa, and it's named after Shaka Zulu Airport, you know what I'm saying? Right. So, you know, it's just, you meet the Hausa and you meet all these different languages of our people and see them performing circumcisions like the Tanakh says, and it's just, like I said, it's just something you can't replace. It's just wonderful.
That's beautiful. Just going back a little bit, what's your knowledge of Rabbi Matthew and Rabbi Ford? Do you have, you know, any knowledge, or did you ever meet Rabbi Matthew? Did you come around? Did he pass away before you came around?
I met Rabbi Matthews on a number of occasions with Cohane Levi.
Okay.
He took me to him. I recall.
So there was still Cohane Levi still had a relationship.
Oh yes, he took me to meet all the rabbis.
Okay.
That was one of my great experiences. I mean, he took me to meet all of them. Rabbi Matthews, we went to his funeral together. Okay. You know, but I met him when he was alive. I remember him always saying to these men, and it always blew my mind, because he would say, this is going to be a great teacher in Israel. Yeah. Cohen had just a vision of what I was going to do. I didn't even understand it. You know, when he would go and tell these men, and I'm in the midst of elders that were the greatest of men in my eyes, you know.
Well, let me tell Rabbi Matthew that this is going to be a good
Yeah, he told them all that. Everyone he introduced me to, that would be what he would say. I just was humbled by it, never even considering, you know, nothing. One of the things that is so important is never to allow praise to blow your head and let you get a swollen head. Right. So those statements just made me more humble. Right. You know, but I never forget how he would always tell them these things. Even Nasi Tavel told me things that, he told me things that, visions that he saw and came to pass.
Wow. So that's great to know. So picking back up, you know, the Lusaf Front, how did that start out? Whose vision was it, and when was like that first day that you left the United States to go and make that contact down there? Who were the first people, if you don't mind sharing that with us?
That's, for me, is the most important question that you've asked, and to me personally, because I want everyone to know that I had never heard of the country of Guyana until I walked into a Shabbat Yisrael.
You didn't even know about it?
I couldn't find it on a map. If you had told me I was going to Guyana, I would have probably looked in Africa for Ghana. But he said Guyana, and there was...
And why did he pick Guyana?
I'll tell you all of that. Very good question. That's what I want you to know, and I want everyone to know. There were many people who were approaching Cohane Levi to come to their country to bring his teachings. Ghana was one of them. The person who I remember who was most consistent was a man called Elder Merritt, who many times Cohen and I would be dropping him somewhere to his home, maybe in Manhattan, and he would be begging Cohen to come to Jamaica. When I arrived in Shabbat Yisrael in 1969, Hashaba had already had a Lusap fund called Leave the United States of America. It was probably more than at least 2 years old prior to my coming. In fact, I remember Cohen telling me about Ben Ami and a delegation coming, Elder Bowie, because I knew Elder Bowie, Ben Ami's teacher, before I even knew Ben Ami. Okay. So I knew him. He's called Elder Eliyahu. I sat in his home many days. In fact, the same time when I met Farrakhan, I was at his home and we discussed scriptures all night long. These were elders, I mean, that were extremely intelligent. Right. And so when I heard about Lusaf, it was a fund where people gave $1 every Shabbat or more towards this fund to leave and go to Guyana. I was told that a Guyanese came into the Shabbat service one day, and he heard Cohen speaking about leaving the United States, and he suggested that they look into Guyana, because Guyana, he said, was an agrarian country. It had all of the features that we were talking about in terms of our land and us being able to engage in agricultural pursuits, because that's where we wanted to go, where we can get back to the land and begin to farm. And so I recall, again, Cohen planning a trip to Guyana. There was a brother named Seren Yashadai, whose landlord was a former major in Guyana.
Okay.
So that also added to our interest, and his interest in wanting to go and investigate. And they made contact with the consulate here in New York City. Arrangements were made for Cohen. I remember Gavret Miriam, a tremendous, great woman, Cohen's wife, scholar. She taught in the yeshiva, and she was again extraordinary scholar. She was
in the yeshiva.
She was a teacher in the yeshiva, and she was the head of the Israelite Institute. I later became, when she passed away, Cohen made me the principal.
She was a teacher in a...
She taught the Jews in yeshiva.
A black woman.
That's where Cohen Reuven went to school, and that's why he was so sharp. He was one of our top Hebrew students, Cohen Reuven. And so again, he grew up in that yeshiva because she worked there. She taught...
And Gavret Dina.
And Dina, that's what I'm saying. So again, that was the background. So again, she had tremendous knowledge in so many areas. You know, I learned so much as a teacher. I took education, so I was a teacher in the public school system, but I learned more in the Gavret Miriam than I did in any university. That's right, because she was profound. And I became the headmaster of the Israelite Institute at her death. But it was through their visit, Nasi Tavel and Sar Shimon, they made the trip to Guyana initially to investigate and to look at our possibility of going. When they returned, it was a definitely go. We knew that that was the country, and it was just a matter of now planning how we would begin to make the move. Later, Moreh Mishael made a trip because a request was made for a Hebrew teacher with the man Rabbi Washington there. And again, we then knew that a priest would be the next person. Cohen said he would send. I remember sitting in Maisha Malka's home on Kings Highway when the decision was made that we had to leave because things got very bad here with drugs. Our children were getting of age. They had to now go from the Israelite Institute into the public school system, and that was again a very challenging situation. Drugs became more strong and prominent in the streets. So many different other economic problems and police issues, all of that. So we knew it was time we had to leave. I think maybe between 73 and 76, Cohen made those visits. I was asked to go and look it over with a brother named BINAH, and then later with Seren Yashadai around 76, 75 perhaps. And again, Cohen told me one day, he said, Cohen Mikhael, the people are not going to leave this country with anyone but two people, because they've let me know we're not going here and leaving this country with anybody unless you, Cohen Levy, leave, or Cohen Mikhael, that you leave. He told me that. He said, I'm not going. So I knew that I was the one that would go. That was a clear. We didn't have much. It was like when he said, "Cohen, when Yehovah said to make you a priest." You know, so it wasn't. No, I knew that, and I was ready because I mean I had already settled in my mind. I was saving for 7 years when I had heard that we were going. I'd already told my parents that that was it. I remember being in classes in university, and the Europeans would be saying how nasty our neighborhoods looked and how, you know, we were such a lowly people, and I would defend us by saying, you know, when the garbage collectors come in Canarsie, they're there every 2 days. You know, they only come to us once every week, and maybe not even once a week. So again, there's a double standard. So they used to say to me, well, if you don't like America, you need to leave it. And I would say to them, I'm working on it. And I meant it. I was working on it, because I knew that, hey, just as I know today, the solution to our people is not an internal solution, it's an external one. This is a great country in many ways, but the racism and discrimination is something that to this very day they have not understood. The other races, in particular the Europeans, our former slave masters, and that is the disgrace of the greatness of America even today.
Right. Okay, so you guys leave. You make your journey. What was it? 1976.
I left in 1977, and then I began to request by families, because I had to make the decision of who would go first. We had what we call Aleph and Beit and different groups that would be coming after the initial group went out. Right. And so I selected the families that I knew I would need with the plan that we had to go and settle and start in Guyana.
So you go down there, buy some land or buy a building, and how did that come about?
Well, Guyana was a socialist country, so from the very start it was not favorable in the eyes of America being a socialist country, with a party known as the PNC. The late Forbes Burnham was the person of that country, and so again we had to deal with very austere conditions, struggling with products that sometimes came from Russia, and you couldn't even read what the label said. You had to just use it.
Figure it out.
So again, you couldn't figure it out. You just had to trust in the creator, that it would be what they say it was. And many of the products were coming from Eastern European countries. And so again, we had to navigate through all of those types of things that were going on. No, we had to find out initially where to live. That was my task with, again, a brother, Saran Yashadai. He was the street person. I played the role of the priest and the teacher. So he went through the streets and we made contacts, because when you go to a country, if you remember the spies that Moses sent out and then Joshua later sent out, they had to go to navigate and get to the people in the streets. So it was just a repetition of that history. We didn't more or less plan it that way, but that's how it occurred. The people in the streets who we bonded with told us all the different things to say, how to use certain words to get what they call a tap-up. Tap-up was when you bought something, you asked for a tap-up, because if you bought a lot, you got like an extra 1 or 2 apples or oranges that you went to get. Which shops to go to, because in Guyana, you can go to one place and it'd be 100% difference. You go over there and it costs, let's say, $10. You go over there, it costs $20. And it's just right across the street. So you have to know which place to go, which places to go. And they pointed those things out because there are people that gravitated to us just by our spirit, you know. They recognized and loved us. Some of them were coming to the United States, so it was a trade-off. We were telling them about Queens, Chicago. So that's how that went. And so again, just being good and nice, because that's the key. You got to befriend people, and you got to be honest. When you go to a country like Guyana, I always teach people, like, someone will maybe give you change that's over the amount deliberately, and you count that money, and they know that they gave you more than that you were supposed to get, and they just want to see, are you going to give it back or are you going to walk away? So they know who they're dealing with. You have to be honest. You have to apply those principles of the Torah. When you do it, I mean, my mother taught me that, you know, manners and honesty is the best policy, and it'll open up doors that money can't buy. So, I mean, that was just, to me, my parents' teachings was what the Torah said.
Right.
I just applied it. I had already been trained from my childhood.
Right.
So it just was natural to this day. I'm beloved in all these countries that I go to.
That's a beautiful thing. So, 1977, you get building or however you guys started. Then Jim Jones gets to Guyana, and being from America, you guys also being from here, how did that, after Jim Jones did what he did, how did that affect you guys, you know, our brothers, you know, being down there, being Americans? How did the people begin to look at you, or did you guys have a stronghold there enough already to where people understood that, all right, these are not those guys?
Great question. I had not been in Guyana a full year yet. Maybe just a little over a year, perhaps. And it was written in the Time magazine that I had left the country and started a cult. Cohane had to write a letter to them to retract that statement that they had written about me.
The New York Times magazine?
The New York Times newspaper.
Newspaper?
The newspaper. And that article's in the newspaper. If you were to go and look it up, you'd find it's that a cult. The people who used to call me Jim Jones, some of them in the country. So again, you had to overcome by adversity, proving that you were not that. There were Guyanese there that loved and knew that I wasn't that. So again, those were issues that took time. The government itself of Guyana had to put a stoppage on any continued process of immigration because they were being scrutinized by every people. Press were coming at my door. People were flying into the country, coming in at my door to interview me, you know, and to try to get some information about what we were doing and what our purpose was. The government of Guyana was under extreme pressure from all the international press. So any group that had arrived, you were automatically put on hold. And I had to go to ministries' offices every day because we had people who were waiting to come immediately. They had sold their apartments, given them up, giving their homes up, giving their jobs up. Great pressure was on me, and there was nothing that I could do. My hands were tied because they were not looking at a single application again. And yet I had to report to the ministry because I'm going there every day, and they'd say, come back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I sit there until 11 o'clock, 11:30. They go and say, take lunch, come back. Had to do that for months. For months, I just had to keep coming, and they wouldn't even speak to me. They just had me come in there each and every day, and I had to go because I'm getting calls from New York City saying, well, what's going on? Why aren't we coming? And why haven't they allowed us? But it was a hold on everyone, so that was extreme pressure within the country. There were people, because hundreds of people lost their lives, and they were labeling us as going to kill other people. You know what I mean?
Was it mostly what people would say Guyanese people, or was it the American people that came, the people that came from America to that died with Jim Jones? Because there's a lot of reports. They said the Guyanese people didn't really drink the Kool-Aid, or, you know, I don't know how that went about.
Well, I'll just put it this way: our pressure did not come from the community that was under Jim Jones. Many of them died, and some of them were killed in Georgetown. So that was their throats were slit. They were in the hotel, 11 people. So there's more to that story than, you know, than what meets the eye. And again, what I recall more than anything else is that it impacted us, something that we had nothing to do with. We didn't even know the community people. They were up in what is known as the Northwest District.
Okay.
They were not even in the area where we lived. So again, we just were affected and impacted. That went and affected even our brothers and sisters in Israel, wherever, anyone that had left the United States, you were again labeled a cult. Right. The press just took the opportunity to, you know what I'm saying, label us all in that. Right. So that's why I said we had to confront even newspapers with letters to let them know that we would sue if they continue to slander. Yeah, right. So Cohen did that on this end. My job was to try and continue to get the door open so that we can continue our journey of settling and finding a place that we could go to try and again free our minds and be able to determine our own destiny. Right. That's what it was really about. Right. And getting back home, I had a charge of not only never coming back to America, because that was one of the charges. Cohen gave me charges. Right. Another one was that Guyana is not the final destination, that we have to get our people home to the land, to Israel. So today I still know what my mission is, and it's just that you're to teach our people. So now it's just not Guyana. We have jurisdictions in Barbados and Trinidad, so we're spreading all over. We've had contact with our people in Brazil, which has the largest numbers of, Israelites in the Western Hemisphere. So again, it's just a continuous work of connecting the Edenic lands of Africa with the Caribbean and with North America, which I still work with people here. I also knew that the priesthood that Cohen established was to be a priesthood that would be the Levitical priesthood of old, that the Levites were to be established as families. Right. And that order of Mishoratim and Cohanim, I added another position called Morim, because we lost priests. Even many of the priests that come in, they were young men and they didn't understand, how to take on such an important responsibility. And some of them lost their lives because this is something you can't play with. It's serious business. So now we are, at least I was told, and Cohen, I still carry it, I don't give the title of priest to young men. I make sure that they are on solid ground and that they have established their families firmly, and then we give them the title of Cohen.
Well, you have a great man right now. He came to our event this week in
Morey Shemuel. That's one of my top teachers. Yeah, many of them. He's one of them.
He's this is the second time he came to our congregation, and then he came to our event, and you can see that he's an outstanding person.
Absolutely.
Just from seeing him and seeing that you rubbed off on him a lot.
Absolutely.